Hi everyone, it's Tara, your friendly neighborhood science goddess, and welcome to the first in a series of videos about putting together your own gradebook and reporting tool in Excel. This example is for beginners, and in this session we'll kind of look at how to organize scores and other items such as assignments and standards and student information. And in later sessions, we'll look at some information on building a reporting tool and managing multiple sets of data. So if you're new to Excel, this is a great place to start, and you can kind of build your skills along the way. If you want to download the workbook that I'm using and play with it for yourself, here is the link. It's a shortened link, so it's bit.ly 0965WG. I like using Excel to organize information for my classes because it's a very flexible tool. I can easily add or delete students, hide information that I don't need to currently use, build different kinds of charts or graphs to provide context for the data. I get to be in control of the formulas applied and what gets displayed. And if you're not Excel's biggest fan, then I'd encourage you to play around with this workbook a little bit. Don't worry about breaking anything because you can always download a nice fresh version. As we look at this, because I have a science background, I've made this a science workbook. I understand that most teachers teach more than one subject or more than one class period in a day, and you certainly have more than 10 students. So in some ways this workbook isn't entirely realistic, but it should be enough for us to get started. As you can see, there are two worksheets set up, one for scores and one for a report. Today we're just going to look at the scores report, and then in the next session we'll actually work with the reporting tool itself. The way that I've organized this, I've picked a couple of different things. First of all, I like to use bold in order to indicate summative assessments. So anytime that you see bold in a cell, just know that that's a mark for me to say that this is a summative assignment. It's something that I will look at in terms of determining final grades for the course. I've also used color to designate different time periods, so a light blue for the first quarter and a slightly darker blue for the second quarter. Now, if you've noticed anything about the default color schemes in Excel, then you know that they're pretty pathetic. But I've used them here just to kind of give you an idea about how you can highlight different kinds of components. And if you're thinking that applying color to a spreadsheet is a little bit too girly for you, just remember that it's important to give yourself quick ways to identify the data that you need. So I would encourage you to find colors that at least make sense for you. And speaking of that, let's use some conditional formatting to help us get a better handle on student scores. So up here on the Home tab we have conditional formatting, and if we hover over it, it tells us that conditional formatting can be used to highlight interesting cells, emphasize unusual values, and visualize data using data bars, color scales, and icon sets based on criteria. And what I use conditional formatting for within my gradebook is to create kind of a stoplight effect, so that I can have some color cells red, some yellow, and some green, to give me an indication about whether or not certain students or my class as a whole is ready to move on to the next topic. So let's put this to good use. First of all, you're going to highlight all the cells that you're going to want to format. So I'm going to pick all of these. Then we're going to go up to conditional formatting and use the pull down menu. Now notice you've got a whole bunch of different kinds of choices here. We can highlight, we can tell it to pick the top or the bottom in the class. We've got some little data bars, different kinds of color scales, so we can do a heat map, and even icon sets, so you can tell it to color at different things depending upon certain kinds of conditions. For today we're just going to use the highlight cells rules. And I like to use the between, even though we can talk about some things that are greater than or less than, because between will capture any sorts of scores that are in between a certain kind of range. And so if you're not always going to use whole numbers for your grading, or you're going to have different kinds of scores, I always recommend using the between. Alright, so let's go between. Now as you look at the worksheet, it's already kind of started to format something for you, but you don't have to accept what it tells you. I'm going to do the lowest end of the scale first, so I'm going to tell Excel that anything that's between a 0 and a 1, which is the very bottom of my scale, I actually want to color those cells red. So I'm going to go down here to Custom Format, choose Fill, and then pick kind of a red color. I know this one's a little pink, but I don't want it overwhelmingly red. Alright, so that's one done. Right? Now I'm going to say if it's between a 1.1 and a 2.9, so kind of the middle of my range, I want it to be yellow. Now I can kind of pick this big bird yellow here, or you can always pick another color. So maybe I'll pick the yellow instead. All right. And for our last one, we're going to say that anything between 3 and 4 is going to be green with the fill color. Okay, so now if we don't select anything, we can kind of see where Excel has filled things in. So all of our 3s are greens, or our 4s, 2s have a yellow background, and 1s are red. And again, how this helps me as a teacher is that if I'm looking at the most recent set of scores, so for example, if I was looking at column J, okay, I can quickly see that most of my students are green, and I have a couple in the yellow, but for the most part it looks like everybody's ready to move on with this topic. Our last task today is to put in some formulas to summarize the scores, because we're going to need this for our report in the next session. And as much as I cheer the movement away from kind of traditional reporting of student performances with A's, B's, C's, and D's, we're still not seeing a lot of change in that area. So for those of you that are stuck with regular report cards and transcript needs, let's at least get Excel to do the heavy lifting for you. So we're going to apply some formulas, a very simple formula. So I'm going to click in this empty cell for second quarter because I want to have kind of a summary of the grades. When you're ready to type a formula, put an equal sign. Okay, you'll notice that you'll also see it up here where you can input the text. So equal, and in this case I want to find the median, but certainly you could do an average if you need to do an average. So I'm going to type the word median and tell Excel I want it to find the median. Now I have to tell it which scores I want it to use. I can tell it to find the median of all the scores, but if I just want to look at summative data, I can just click on those bold-faced cells. And again, this is one of those times why using a different font can be very helpful. So I'm going to tell it I want the median of that one. I'm going to put a comma here because I have another one, and this one. Close my parentheses, hit enter, and now I have the median. I don't have to do this for all of the cells for all of the students. Once I've got that cell selected, if you move your cursor to the bottom right hand corner, you'll see the cursor change to a little black plus sign. Just click and drag it all the way down the column, and now you have filled in for all your students. And notice that your conditional formatting goes right along with that. Okay, so again, median, tell it the cells that you want, and hit enter. Okay, so here's for second quarter. So maybe I've had a topic that went over the course of the semester. Again, select, fill down. So see, Excel's pretty friendly here. Alright, one more set of scores. Notice on this one, when you have two cells that are close together, you can just drag across and select them. And I'm going to talk about this little green triangle here in just a minute. Okay, notice that this cell has a little green triangle in the top. So if I click on that cell, it gives me a little error message. If I use the pull-down menu here, it says formula omits adjacent cells. What Excel is telling me is that it understands that there are numbers on either sides of the cells that I selected, and would I like to include those. If I don't, I just tell it to ignore the error. But before I do that, I'm going to select these, drag down, and then I'm going to tell it to ignore the error. That way it wipes out all of those at once. Alright, so I think we've been productive enough for one day, don't you? We'll stop here, come back for the next session, and we'll take the data and we'll build a reporting tool. See you next time.